Today's show is sponsored by Earth Friendly Products. For over 40 years, Earth Friendly Products have brought you the greenest home products for all your family needs. Learn more at ecos.com. That's ecos.com. Now let's get to the show. Today's show is sponsored.
What's your thoughts on government cover-ups or covert societies attempting to control humanity? Do you believe in ancient astronauts, intergalactic communication, or extraterrestrial visitations? Ever had an experience with disembodied spirits or the paranormal universe? Are these subjects fact or fiction? Each week, Tony and Eddie explore these unbelievable realities and beyond. Exclusively on Truth Be Told.
Hello and welcome to Truth Be Told with Tony and Eddie. I'm Tony Sweet, and with me now, world-renowned psychic Eddie Connor.
Thanks, Tony. Good afternoon, everybody. Now, I hope everyone's having an amazing week. And Tony, I have a question for you.
What's that?
Who is your favorite president of the United States?
Well, I would say modern day Bill Clinton, but overall I would say Abraham Lincoln.
He's my favorite too. Well, you're in for a treat because today's guest is a famous author specializing on Abraham Lincoln.
And the author, Ed Steers, has appeared on the History Channel, providing information on the Lincoln assassination. His book, Blood on the Moon, has won the Lincoln Group of New York's Award of Achievements. Steers has published 7 other books pertaining to the 16th president, including insight on covering the home front during World War II.
He has also made other appearances on Book Notes with Brian Lamb, PBS's morning editor with Bob Edwards, C-SPAN, and even The Today Show. He's even trained in molecular biology at the University of Pennsylvania. And lucky for Truth Be Told fans all around the world, he's right here with us today. So please put your hands together. Welcome author, researcher, and today's guest expert, Ed Steers.
Welcome, Ed.
Oh, that's quite a welcome. Thank you very much. I'm glad to be with you guys.
Well, all the audience were very excited, and as you can tell, and we're excited to have you here. And Truth Be Told is one of those things that we get into UFOs, paranormal, conspiracy, and I'm a big fan of history. And so when I get to do both of conspiracy and history at the same time, I'm excited. So we're excited to have Ed here today. And Ed, before we get started with the topic of the assassination of Abraham Lincoln, I want to know how you made the transition from being a molecular biologist to a biologist to an author and focusing on World War II and Abraham Lincoln.
Well, history has always been a very, very strong interest of mine, secondary to science. And when I came to the National Institutes of Health in Washington in 1963, I came to ground zero for the Lincoln assassination in Lincoln. I mean, I was within very close proximity to the National Archives, to the Library of Congress, to the Surratt Society in Clinton, Maryland, which is an organization devoted to the assassination, and to the escape route of John Wilkes Booth from Forest Theater down into Virginia at the Garrett Farm. So it was almost like stepping back into history to be in that region and area, and it just came naturally. You mentioned conspiracy. There is no individual in American history probably than Abraham Lincoln who is surrounded by conspiracy, whether it's with his assassination, his presidency. The landscape is littered with myth and hoaxes that are associated with Lincoln for a variety of reasons that should be obvious. And so the Lincoln assassination is one of those areas that is heavily laden with conspiracy of all sorts. And Americans love conspiracy. You guys probably know that.
Oh, yes.
Oh, yeah.
We wouldn't be here today.
John F. Kennedy, his assassination, there are a whole multitude of conspiracy theories. Abraham Lincoln has even more conspiracy theories associated with his assassination. And so and of course, it's an area in which the American public has familiarity. I mean, despite their degree of knowledge in history, and some of it is very low, everyone knows Abraham Lincoln.
Oh, of
Everyone
course.
knows John Wilkes Booth, and they know he killed Abraham Lincoln. So everyone has a little bit of knowledge on this subject, and I've come to learn that it is the one of the subjects in American history that Americans are fascinated by. Whenever you give a talk or make an appearance on Lincoln's assassination, it's usually a sold-out audience.
Oh yeah, I mean I would be there just because, yeah, like I said, it shaped our history of America and the world, and people always want to know what. I wonder what would have happened if he wouldn't have been assassinated. What would have been different and changed? I mean, he definitely made an impact on the America history when it comes to the slavery, and I'm sure tons of other things. But this year, I believe, in April 14th, would have been the 150th anniversary when John Wilkes Booth killed President Lincoln. Is that correct?
That is correct. This was the sesquicentennial of Lincoln's assassination. Yes.
So let's go back. Let's go back a little bit. When you started first writing your first book, and what was some of the information that you didn't know that really surprised you when you started doing research on President Lincoln and his assassination?
That's a great question, because I could just set it up for us, Ed, where you're sitting in your study, you're sitting in your office, you're doing your research, you're very passionate about this person, obviously, and wanting to get to the truth of the matter. And you're there by the lantern light, and then you read and you come across some things that just make your mouth drop open, and you can't wait to share it with somebody. So take us back to that place where you had those experiences like Tony's asking you about.
It wasn't quite like that.
Wonk, wonk, wonk.
No. But being a scientist, things tend to be black and white, right or wrong. You have only one interest, and that's to find out the truth.
Right.
And you follow the facts wherever they may lead you, as opposed to an advocate who follows the facts wherever he or she may want them to lead them. And so when I first got into this, I suppose the first thing that, in essence, rocked me was Dr. Mudd. I mean, like everyone else, and perhaps like both of you, I grew up under the impression that Dr. Mudd was an innocent victim, and that he was basically railroaded by the federal government, and the poor guy was sentenced to life in prison for doing nothing more than following his Hippocratic oath. But as I got more and more into it, I came to realize that Dr. Mudd was not only a conspirator of Booth, he was the key conspirator through which Booth could not put together his so-called action team without Mudd and Mudd's help. And of course, this went against the grain of what the general public knows and what many historians believed at the time. And I found that it became quite an effort to be able to document and convince people that Dr. Mudd, in fact, was a key conspirator. And I have come to realize over the years that he will remain an American folk hero with the general public. It's been very hard to persuade them. Historians, however, now almost uniformly agree with me that Mudd was a major conspirator in helping Booth, and in fact, was lucky that he wasn't sentenced to death along with the other four. And just an aside, how I got to this was I decided to start the investigation basically with the sequence of Booth's recruitment into his team. So I wanted to find out, when did he first begin? Who did he first approach? Who was second? Who was third? Who was fourth on down the line? And I thought that would be quite revealing to what actually happened, and it turned out it was. And that's how I discovered Booth early on as the number 3 recruit, who then was responsible for bringing in 4, 5, 6, and 7, and even 8 into Booth's conspiracy. So I would say that was the first big one. The second one was the involvement of the Confederate Secret Service.
Yes.
Oh.
And this has been a bone of contention. There is a wonderful researcher, now deceased, who probably was the dean of Lincoln assassination research, James O. Hall, who wrote a book called Come Retribution. And his conclusion with his co-authors was that Booth was, in fact, acting on behalf of the Confederacy all the way up to Jefferson Davis. My research indicates I can't find any evidence that puts it on the desk of Jefferson Davis, but there is absolutely no doubt that Booth was in contact with, aided, and abetted by the Confederate Secret Service, both before the assassination and after the assassination. So the question you'd have to ask, and I would say to people, did agents in the Confederate Secret Service act on their own as rogue agents in helping Booth in his plan, or were they acting under orders or the blessing of the Confederate leadership? And that's a question we can't prove one way or another. You either have to, you can say that they acted as rogue agents on their own, or you can say agents would not act on their own without direction from the top. Either way, the Confederate Secret Service played a key role. So this was indeed a much wider conspiracy than people like Jim Bishop led us to believe in his book, The Day Lincoln Was Shot.
Right. Yeah, this was definitely something they planned for a long time. And I think a lot of people thought maybe it was just, growing up, in the history class, we didn't really hear all about the conspiracy. We just heard about the man, killing Lincoln. So,
well, if I may just put a footnote there, you have to remember Booth did not set out to kill Lincoln. That was not his plan.
What do you want to kidnap?
A dead Lincoln was of little value
right.
to Booth or the Confederacy. He set out to capture Lincoln, kidnap him, take him south, and use him for ransom, a bargaining chip against the Union. That's why he put together a team of 8 to 9 conspirators. He doesn't need these people to kill Lincoln. He can do that on his own, as he well did. That team of conspirators that he put together, and the help of the Secret Service, was, of course, to capture Lincoln, not kill him. And people can't seem to separate that. And so this involvement with the Confederate Secret Service is going to Montreal and meeting with agents up there either isn't in a lot of the history books, or it's just a footnote, as if Booth was on vacation in Montreal, that this conspiracy was not being laid out and built while he was up in Montreal.
So what made him decide to kill him? Was it after the surrenders, and then he decided? I mean, when did he made that flip? When did he make that flip of saying, I'm going to kill him?
Remember, Richmond is evacuated on April the 2nd and occupied by Union troops on April 3rd. On April 9th, Lee surrenders. So if Booth has a captured Lincoln, he has nowhere to take him.
Oh.
Because Jefferson Davis and the Confederate government are fleeing. They're on their way through Virginia, headed to Georgia, trying to get deep south. So the game is up as far as capturing Lincoln and using him as a bargaining chip. There's nowhere to go. And so at that point, some of us believe Booth decided to decapitate the federal government, not just Lincoln, but the Vice President, Andrew Johnson, the Secretary of State, William Seward, and the General-in-Chief of the Armies, U.S. Grant. All 4 were targets. And so think what would happen if all 4 had been killed.
Yeah.
And I dare say there are very few people in your audience that know the succession law in 1865 as to who would become president, if anyone, if both the president and vice president were killed. So Booth's objective, we think, was to decapitate the federal government, throw it into total chaos, thereby allowing the Confederacy time to regroup. It still had 160,000 troops in the field. That's a large army.
That's huge.
Yes.
But it was divided. Half was down in the Trans-Mississippi, half was in North Carolina. Davis wanted to find a way to pull them together and then turn that large army against Grant and sue for peace, have some sort of negotiated peace agreement. Now, in hindsight, we know that's foolish. It just never would have happened. But you have to put yourself back in 1865 and in their shoes. Your country is dying.
Yeah.
You're not going to give up. You're going to try every possible thing you can to save your country. And Booth, what did he write in his diary? He wrote, "Our country being almost lost, something decisive and great must be done." That word "almost" is key to what happened. Booth did not think it was over. And neither did Jefferson Davis, because he's meeting with his generals. He even signed an order now accepting blacks into the Confederate Army, something that was adamantly opposed during the war. But in desperation now, they wanted to, there's still somewhere in the neighborhood of 3.5 million blacks in the South. And of the eligible males, you're probably talking well over 1 million. So the point is, these people were not giving up, and they felt that there was still hope out there and there was still a possibility. Booth's plan was not as crazy as some people think it was. It had a chance of success.
I'm going to ask you, and this you may have been asked this before. What if Booth did decapitate the U.S. government? What would have happened in what direction do you think it would have gone if he succeeded?
That's the key, isn't it? To decide in Booth's mind whether this could work or not. Who would become president of the United States? Most people say Secretary of State. Not true. The succession law at the time was the President pro tem of the Senate, who was the senior senator from Connecticut, Lafayette S. Foster, a very elderly, minor political official, would have become the acting president of the United States. He would be acting president. He then is charged by the Succession Act of 1794 of reconvening the Electoral College to pick a new president. Well, you're talking about bringing in electors from Oregon and California and from what was then known as the Northwest. It would take weeks to bring these people in and to pick a new president. So that's the one view of what would happen, and there would be general chaos. I don't think that would happen at all. Edwin Stanton would have stepped in, as he did, and take complete control, even though he is not in the line of succession, immediate succession, to become president. But he was such a powerful, controlling man that he would step in, take the reins of the government, and I think very little would have changed, very little. And probably the scenario would have played out just as it did, where Johnston would have surrendered sometime in late April, and the war would officially come to an end by May 1st. And I think Jefferson Davis probably would have been captured by the second week of May. So I don't think things would have changed much at all had the three men been. Now, if Grant had also been killed, I think Sherman would have stepped in as commander-in-chief of the federal forces, and there couldn't be a better general to head them. He was every bit as capable of Grant, if not more capable. So I really don't think the scenario would have changed at all. Once again, you have to put yourself back in 1865 in their situation. You can't think in terms of 2015.
Oh,
right.
No.
Yeah.
And that's very difficult. It's very difficult for people to do. And people say, well, you mean the President of the United States didn't have a bodyguard? He wasn't guarded by people at all times? He wasn't. And this man walked around the city of Washington on his own. He rode his horse out to Soldiers' Home 3 miles north of Washington at night by himself. Early in the morning, he rode back into Washington every day during the summer. So in those days, the president was not guarded like he is today. And as William Seward said, assassination is simply not in the American character. And he was quite wrong, of course.
Right.
Yeah, so wrong. Are you fascinated, Ed, by when you're doing your historical research, especially as a scientist, and you're going back and you're pulling the facts, as you say? I like how you said that you just follow the trail of facts. Are you surprised at how some history books will say one thing versus what often the truth really is when you get down to the nuts and bolts of it?
You have hit a very raw nerve.
Oh, good job, Eddie.
Yeah, you have. Listen, we all know, because we see examples of it all the time, where the knowledge of Americans in history is declining considerably.
Oh, yeah.
And sometimes it becomes humorous, because on TV shows they make fun of it when they interview people in the street and they can't even tell you who the vice president is,
Right.
or who was president during the Second World War. History is on a serious decline in this country. Universities and colleges are dropping certain history courses, shrinking their faculties, cutting history budgets, because we're shifting nationally in our higher institutions from a liberal arts education, which was always the hallmark of American education, to a highly technical, specialized education.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of perception that because things are becoming so technical with computers and social media and what have you, that we have to put our emphasis in education in technology. And so things like history are considered unimportant. The humanities are considered not as important. And so we're seeing that taking place. Secondly, reading, while the number of readers increases, the percentage of readers in the United States is decreasing. The population is increasing at a greater rate than the number of readers.
That's scary.
That's another problem. But most of all, the general public gets its history from the movies and from television, not from reading academic books like mine, which may be heavy for some people. And so the movies and television are giving us history. And I've made quite a study of this. I can tell you that of all the historical movies that I have seen, and I've seen a great number of them,
Gone with the Wind.
not one, not a single one has been factual.
Really?
Oh, I
Not one.
love this. I love that you're saying this.
Yeah, I think it's important for people to listen to that.
So
It's a serious problem. I mean, even Steven Spielberg's movie Lincoln, which got praise from everyone, had serious fallacies in it. Not that it would necessarily affect the public too much, but it's just very troubling to me and to my colleagues in history who are well aware of this. And so I think what's happening is we're separating into two classes. The class of the general public, which again has a smattering of history and gets it superficially from movies and from television, and then hardcore people who are serious. They buy the books, they read them, they study Civil War roundtables, World War II roundtables, Lincoln groups. These people are reasonably highly educated in their subject, but they're small groups, and they're shrinking. They're getting smaller. The question is, does it matter?
yes.
Is it important?
Yes, it's important. Yes, it matters. Because don't you find that when we blatantly ignore what we came from, not only are we destined to repeat history over and over and over, we have to learn from our mistakes in the past. And if we don't let the young people study it and really become aware of what's going on, then we're just destined for the same BS.
Amen.
I really feel, remember back in the day when they started, as soon as budget cuts, and I'm 54, and I can remember I was lucky enough to go to school where it was more liberal. We had art, we had dance, we had music, we had chorus, and we also had all of the other stuff that nobody liked, calculus, algebra, speaking French, and all of that. But we had history. History was a staple. It was the staple, in my opinion. And then as I graduated high school, I did start noticing that immediately they started cutting art and music and dance and anything that stimulated the creative mind. Now, I personally believe you need to stimulate both the creative mind and the logical mind and marry the best of those worlds together inside of each person. That's just my belief. But I cannot even fathom the fact that they are discontinuing. They're cutting out history because of technical stuff. That's just crazy to me.
Well, a lot of people agree with you, but the trend continues, and it isn't clear it's going to change or reverse itself anytime soon. I've always felt very strongly that the reason the United States is the greatest nation on earth and the greatest power on earth is not because of our military strength. because this nation has always been smarter than every other nation. We've been more advanced, more innovative than any other nation. It's our educational standards, which, by the way, were unique. We were the only country in the world that had full general public education. Other countries, even highly advanced countries, only select segments of their population were educated. The United States took a totally different view. They mandated that everybody get educated, all the way up to the 12th grade level, which at one time was quite a high level. As a matter of fact, many of us today feel that people that graduated high school back in the 40s, 50s, 60s are equivalent to people who are sophomores and juniors in college now.
Oh, yeah.
And in some areas and subjects, equal to people who are seniors and graduates. So there has been a steady decline. There's been a steady shift away from the liberal arts to these highly specialized areas. And if this continues, it's quite possible the United States could eventually give up its lead as a great nation because of its superior intellect and innovation. It's not quite as grim as all that, because we still have this tip of the iceberg in this country, which is still superb. The problem is the base of that triangle is broadening out. It's getting bigger and bigger, and the tip is getting smaller and smaller. We still have the brightest, smartest, most innovative people in the world at the top of that tip. But it's beginning to become a little worrisome because that tip is getting narrower and narrower, and we wanted to get wider and wider. And we just don't know where it's headed. We really don't. And the only thing you can say is the pendulum passes through the center twice for every time it hits the extreme. So let's hope.
Wow.
But as far as history is concerned, it is in a decline. There's no doubt about it. And that is very sad because, as you pointed out, it is absolutely essential for us as a nation to understand our history and understand the history of the world. It could prove to be deadly.
And I think this is why, Eddie and I enjoy people like yourself, and we can share with our audience not just, like I said, the paranormal and the conspiracies, but the history of that shaped who we are today. I mean, this is very important. I'm a big Ancestry.com. I've been researching my family for 25 years. I found out my 7th great grandfather was Richard Stockton, who was one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence. And I think, if I didn't care about history, I would never know what wealth that not through monetary, but just the wealth that I've learned about who I am today because of the people that sacrificed and made this country great. So,
right. And who we are as a nation today because of people who sacrificed and what they did. And
exactly.
It's just important. It's important that we all know that and understand it. But it's becoming a struggle. It's becoming a battle.
Well, it is, and I know we're going to take a break in just a second here, Ed, but I find this might sound like it's not remotely connected, but in my mind, in my heart, it is connected. It almost feels like a borderline blatant disrespect of where we've been and where we're going. And if you don't, it's like when Tony speaks about history, when you speak about anything historical, Ed, you and Tony both have this desire to keep things going in a grounded, rooted, healthy, balanced, aligned way. And it's not about ramming any information down anybody's throat. We all can feel how it is about respecting our relatives who came before us, the ones we knew, the ones we didn't know. And even when Tony talks about his relative being 7th or 8th generation connected to the Declaration of Independence or the Constitution, there's something that makes you prouder to be an American. It's like, I don't know why we would want to let that stuff go. But I know we're going to take a break in just a second. Are we doing it right now, Tony?
No, go ahead.
Okay. I hope I don't strike another nerve here, Ed. But I want to ask you, what do you think about all of the political correctness that goes on when it comes to history, what we're allowed to say, what we can't say as a result of we don't want to hurt one demographic's feelings, we don't want to hurt another culture's feelings, even though it is real, it's true, it actually happened back in the day, and again, hopefully we can grow and learn from it. So what do you feel about the political correctness with history?
Well, as you've indicated, of course I don't approve of it and I don't accept it, think much of it. Again, my whole background is science. I mean, we care about one thing and one thing only, and that's the truth. When you become a scientist, if you're going to be successful at all, you quickly learn that the truth is above everything, and there's a tremendous comfort and satisfaction in being with the truth, whatever it is. Now, I realize the truth can vary with different people. In science, it's a lot more black and white. I mean, you can set up and design experiments that give you data which are absolute, but the point is, you can manipulate fact all you want. The satisfaction and the comfort is in the truth. And that old saying has been with me ever since I was a kid when I saw it on the high school building, you shall know the truth and the truth shall set you free. The minute you begin to pervert that or begin to in any way modify it or twist it, you're limiting and modifying and twisting how free you are, and constraining your own self rather than being free. So
wow.
I don't have a problem with it. I mean, I'm perfectly happy with the truth, and I can live with it, and I revel in it, and I really don't have much problem
and you learn
with it
from
at all. But I realize that it is becoming a problem. But once again, the pendulum goes through the center twice for every time it hits the extreme, so there is hope. But the only other point I would add to you is this. There's another thing about history, and it's just plain fun. It's interesting.
It is.
It's exciting. There are some amazing things out there that have happened in our history and the world's history, and they're just fun. It's not. You don't have to labor at it. It doesn't have to be work or unpleasant. It can be a very pleasing experience. And guys like me and my friends are doing our damnedest to try and make it interesting, and exciting, but at the same time factual. The historians know better than anyone else. Truth is stranger than fiction.
Oh, God, yeah. And that's what puts you in the top 5% of all of the people on this planet and in this country. That puts you right there at the top of the iceberg with the other geniuses that are here. You're finding a way. You're genuinely looking for, and so are your colleagues, and you're looking for a way not to reinvent the wheel, but to repackage this thing that a couple of people who are holding purse strings politically over structured education is trying to push out. And you're trying to find an advantageous way, a creative, artistic way to get that message through the cracks any way, shape, or form you can. And you're making it fun. And that's what makes you ingenious. That's what puts you in the top 5 percentile. And that's why we need more people like you on planet Earth. Okay, Ed?
Well, thank you very much. I intend to stay around for a while.
Well, I hope so.
Do what I can.
Well, we want you to stay around for about 15 more seconds because we're going to take about a 15-second break, and then we're going to talk about. I want to talk about John Wilkes Booth a little bit more about the past and especially the manhunt, because this is great. So, I'm Tony Sweet.
I'm Eddie Connor.
You're listening to Truth Be Told with Tony and Eddie right here on Universal Broadcasting Network. We'll be back in about 15 seconds. We hope you're enjoying today's show, which is sponsored by Earth Friendly Products. For over 40 years, Earth Friendly Products have brought you the greenest home merchandise for all your family needs. Learn more at ecos.com. That's ecos.com. Now back to the show.
Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Truth Be Told with Tony and Eddie. I'm Eddie Connor.
I'm Tony Sweet.
And we have with us author Ed Stearns, who has appeared on the History Channel providing information on Lincoln's assassination. His book, Blood on the Moon, has won the Lincoln Group of New York's Award of Achievement, and he's also published 7 other books pertaining to the 16th President of the United States, including insight on covering the home front during World War II. And now we're going to ask him a little bit more about John Wilkes Booth.
So, Ed, I'm excited about this because a lot of people don't know the background. They knew he was an actor. He was born in Maryland in 1838. So let's talk about a little bit more about his background and how he became an actor. If you know that, and then how he got part of the sympathizer of the South.
Well, Booth is different than all assassins in the United States. Booth was intelligent. He had few, if any, enemies. He was a well-liked fellow. He was generous to a fault with his friends. He was bright. He was witty. And at the time of the assassination, or at least up to a year before, he had reached the pinnacle of American acting. He was a matinee idol. He was America's acting star. And this man, in the year before the assassination, earned $20,000 in that year.
Oh my
That's
God!
a lot of money back then.
Yeah, that
He was a millionaire.
huge amount of money. Absolutely huge amount of money. More money than he could spend, probably. But this was not your typical assassin. He certainly was not, as some people have thought or claimed, crazy or insane. Not in the least. He was very rational, and as I said, very bright, very witty, very educated. He came from a family of actors. His father, Junius Brutus Booth, and that name tells you something, was the greatest American tragedian at the time, and he died in the late 1850s. His eldest son, Edwin Booth, then became America's greatest actor and stage manager. He operated theaters in Baltimore and New York. And Booth was the fourth in line of this family to take up acting. And Booth he started out rather rough, but he very quickly, within a few years, elevated to the top of his field. He packed them in wherever he went. This guy had everything. He had everything going for him. But he was a tremendous admirer of the South and Southern culture. Even though his family was unionistic, supported the Union, and were anti-slavery, opposing slavery, even abolitionists to an extent, Booth was the opposite. He was pro-slavery. He wrote a manifesto at great length explaining his position, firmly, honestly believing that slavery was a blessing to the black man, as many people in the South attempted to justify it.
Right.
You took people out of the jungle who were ignorant, brought them to America, where they then were exposed to Christianity and exposed to a civilized life. And as Booth said, it was a blessing for them. And here, this man came along and basically, in a stroke of a pen, was going to abolish this practice and in the process, destroy the culture of the South. Little over 8 million people in the South, of which 4 million were slaves. Yeah. If you were to emancipate the slaves in the South, you're talking about roughly $5 billion in property value. At the time, it was worth about $5 billion in property value. So you are decimating the economy of the South. Lincoln knew this, and that's why he offered to buy the slaves. The federal government would issue treasury bonds buying the slaves, so that the South's economics would not be totally destroyed and overturned. The Congress of the United States said, no, we refuse to do that. The Congress of the Confederate States said, no, we're not going to accept that. And so Lincoln said, well, if it means war, then let it be war. And so war came. Now, Booth viewed these actions as that of a despot, which he equated to Julius Caesar. And in one of his manifestos, he ended it by saying, Caesar must bleed. And he viewed himself as our American Brutus. As Brutus killed the tyrant Caesar, who attempted to destroy Roman government, Abraham Lincoln was a despot who destroyed the United States. And Booth really truly expected that he would be received as a hero. And that he would gain even greater fame because he had rid America of its greatest despot and tyrant. And I have to say this, there were a huge number of people that agreed with him, a very large number.
Oh, yeah. One of them was Donald Trump, right?
Well, I don't know, but here's another fascinating thing in history. Most people don't realize that Lincoln was elected president with 39% of the popular vote. Only 39%. There were 34 states. Lincoln was not on the ballot in 10 of them.
That's
So
crazy.
So he was a sectional president elected solely in the 24 states in the North, of which he lost 7. He only won 17 states. So he is a minority president. Yeah. He is a sectional president, and he brings with him a policy that is going to dramatically change this country in ways it has never been changed before. So he's not only fighting the Confederacy in his front, he's got a fifth column in his back that he's fighting. And in 1864, he met with his cabinet and he wrote a private memo, which he didn't show his cabinet, but he asked them all to sign it in camera, a blind signing. And it basically said, "It is increasingly obvious that I will not be reelected. And at which time we will have to do everything we possibly can to end this war before the new president comes into office, because if he does come into office before we do, the game is over. He will settle with the Confederacy for peace. He'll let the Confederacy go, and the nation will be split in half." That's stark. That is really startling. And Lincoln believed that firmly. It turned out he was wrong. He had misjudged the American public, and of course he was reelected. Thank God.
Thank God.
But it shows the climate at the time, okay? And while today Lincoln is our greatest president by every measure, every standard, every poll, it's ironic because in 1864 and 65 he was not the man that we see today. He was a man that was constantly surrounded by trouble and by animosity and a divided country that many wanted to see him dead.
You have to have such a thick skin to go in and create even a small amount of change when you're talking about humans and their belief systems, and everyone thinks they're right and everyone thinks the other ones are wrong. I mean, could you even imagine the level of pressure that was on his head, in his heart, when he is like creating these huge ripples of change, literally that affect the world to a point. And now, I am not as well versed in all of this history as you are, Ed, but wasn't Lincoln, when he was in the office, wasn't he Republican?
One of the first.
Oh, yes. He was our first Republican president. I don't know where you're going with this, but you should understand that the parties have done a total flip, 180-degree flip.
100%, yeah. That's where I was going
with
it.
The Republican Party during the Civil War was the party that believed in a strong federal government, taxation, civil rights. The Democratic Party was a party that believed in a small, ineffectual federal government, states' rights, opposed civil rights, and opposed taxation. So the parties have just done a complete flip from what they were. So the Republican Party today, if they know their history, cannot put up Abraham Lincoln as their symbol.
Yeah.
He's the symbol of the Democratic Party today.
And
Stephen Douglas is the symbol of the Republican Party today. That's just a fact of history. You can't dodge it. So
and here's a fun question for you. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but here's a fun question. Today we have like a handful of people who have billions and billions of dollars, and they've got politicians, Congress people in their back pocket, like the Koch brothers, Monsanto, and I could go on. Back in the day, back in this era, who were some of the people who had great influence like that, who were trying to put certain politicians or congressmen in their back pocket, Ed?
Oh, my goodness, there was a whole slew of them, mostly in the banking industry.
Yeah,
but
that's what I thought.
This is a sidelight of the Civil War that you really have to be a historian to understand. There were all kinds of deals going on. Captured cotton. Lincoln was issuing permits that allowed certain individuals to go down and resell the captured cotton and split with the government. And so you had a lot of robber barons doing everything they could to get these warrants from Lincoln so they could go down and scoop up this cotton and become millionaires. You had bankers like Jay Cook, who were the richest men in America, but Lincoln had to use them because he needed money, and so Jay Cook went out and sold millions of dollars in bonds to help finance the war, and therefore Jay Cook was getting all kinds of privileges in banking and so forth. There was a lot of hanky-panky that went on. This is one of the conspiracy theories, that the bankers and the mercantile interests in the North got together and said Lincoln is going to be too tough on us, and therefore we got to get rid of him at the end of the war and replace him with a more pliable president so we can go down and rape the South. And so that is the so-called missing pages from Booth's diary, which are a fraud. They never existed. But the conspiracy theory there is that Booth outlined in detail his meetings with these bankers and financiers in the North to plot the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. Like every hoax and fraud, there are strong elements of fact and truth. In my experience, and I've written 2 books on hoaxes, every one of them has fact underlying it. And this is a conspiracy theory that's nonsense, but it has good, strong fact underlying it, that there were these financiers in the North. Lincoln was a problem to them. It was clear that Lincoln was, when the war ended, was going to let the South up gently, bring it back into the Union, reestablish their own economic systems. He was not going to allow Northerners to go down and, in essence, rape the South, confiscate land, take over banks. He wanted the South to come back in as fast as it could, just the way it was when it left,
Wow.
except for the absence of slavery. And he said that again and again, and that was his policy. You mentioned very early in this program that the assassination of Lincoln changed this country. Well, this is one way it changed it dramatically. Things would have been so different in this country had Lincoln survived in terms of reconstruction of the South, in terms of civil rights for blacks. That Civil Rights Act would not have come in 1964. It would have come in Lincoln's second administration with full force.
Wow.
Yeah.
Lincoln favored suffrage for blacks. He favored suffrage for women. He said so. The one thing that is most admirable about Lincoln, he said what he thought. He told the truth. The consequences be damned. I mean, he stood up and said he favored suffrage for blacks. He realized that was a problem, so he favored suffrage for blacks that served in the Union Army, 230,000, and for those that were educated. And he favored suffrage for women. He said women have as much right as men to decide the destiny of their country that they have to live in. This is revolutionary.
Huge.
I mean, this is so far thinking. I mean, he is so far out in front of the rest of the country. This man established the land grants during the war, established the Homestead Act, 13 new states. We now have 71 land grant colleges in this country. This man was so magnanimous and smart that when he established the land grant colleges, he did that by giving government land to each state, and the state could sell the land, but they had to use the money to establish a college. They couldn't use it for anything else. He gave land to all of the southern states in rebellion, all 11 states. If that land was sold, the money was put in escrow, and when the war ended, turned over to those southern states so that they could establish colleges. So you have the University of Mississippi, the University of Alabama, the University of North Carolina, University of Texas. This is an incredible man, and his vision of America was so far in advance of everybody else's. You can just see this, and most people don't even know about land grant colleges or the Homestead Act in the middle of a civil war. But you know, this guy was unique. Well, I mean, he was different.
And we literally have 2 minutes left, Ed. But I tell you
sorry.
something. No, this is we love
I was
this.
going to ask other questions, but I'm like, that's one of the best endings right there.
I know. And isn't it fascinating that every major leader we've ever had that is pro-black, pro-women, pro-equal rights across the board, Martin Luther King, JFK, Abraham Lincoln, all get murdered.
Well, it is clear that these are issues that draw the most passion and the most animosity from people. Somehow or other, they go deep inside people's feelings and bring out the worst. Yeah. And again, this is a question of history, and it's why it's important to understand our history.
People, do you hear that out there?
I know. It's like, but you got to know where you came from.
Yeah,
you got to know where you came from so you can keep elevating yourself and everybody around you as you move forward.
Right. Well, Ed, because the time's up, I'm going to already give you an invitation for another time because I would love to have you come back and talk about World War II. That's another...
And some of the hoaxes.
Yeah, and then the 2 books on hoaxes because that sounds fun right there. But everybody go to edsteers.com. You can check out many of his books and pick up his books on his website, on Amazon, I'm sure many other places. Blood on the Moon, the Lincoln Assassination Encyclopedia. There's so much more that you guys can learn from Ed and his journey through putting these books together for us to enjoy and learn from. So, but we want to thank you so much, Ed, for being here today, and we hope. There goes the crowd again. And please.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I enjoyed it, and I hope it helps some, and I hope your audience enjoyed it. Any of them have any questions, they can email me. They get my email off the website.
Beautiful.
And I'll be glad to answer them.
That's great. No, I might even have some of my own. So, but until next time, Ed, take care of yourself and keep up the great work.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
All right. Well, take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to take a quick break. We have another episode of Truth Be Told here at 5 o'clock. Eddie, could you tell us who
Absolutely. We have Helen Duncan coming up. She's the owner and facilitator of spiritclean.biz, and she's going to talk to you about the importance of your space, both business and personal, and she's going to elevate your frequency, ladies and gentlemen. So join us back in just a minute. I'm Eddie Connor.
I'm Tony Sweet.
And you're listening to Truth Be Told.
Take care.